Dawn breaks across the vast American continent as smoke rises from countless ancient civilizations. From the Pacific Northwest's cedar longhouses to the Southwest's ancestral Pueblo and adobe pueblos, from the Great Plains hide lodges to the eastern woodlands bark-covered homes, indigenous peoples are already beginning their day. Some tend sacred fires that have burned for generations, others check fish weirs in rushing streams, while children learn traditional songs that carry the wisdom of ages. But what exactly filled the hours of America's first peoples? The popular image of feathered warriors on horseback, living in teepees and hunting buffalo, captures only a tiny fraction of Native American life. For over 15,000 years before European contact, hundreds of distinct indigenous societies developed sophisticated ways of living that varied as dramatically as the landscapes they called home. So how did they spend their waking hours when survival, spirituality, and community were seamlessly woven together? Watch until the end to uncover the shocking truth about America's most advanced ancient civilizations, and why everything you thought you knew about primitive Native Americans is completely wrong. Yet this wasn't a static period. Massive innovations in agriculture, architecture, astronomy, and social organization occurred throughout indigenous history. The scale of this achievement becomes clear when we consider the numbers. Over 500 distinct tribes, speaking more than 300 languages, developing unique adaptations to environments ranging from Arctic tundra to tropical swamps. Our understanding of indigenous daily life comes from multiple sources. Archaeological sites preserve ancient villages, farming terraces, and sophisticated tool technologies. Oral traditions passed down through generations maintain detailed knowledge of traditional practices. Early ethnographic accounts, though often biased, provide glimpses into pre-contact life. The indigenous experience wasn't monolithic. A Hopi farmer tending corn in the Arizona desert had a profoundly different daily routine than an Inuit hunter tracking seals across Arctic ice, or a Cherokee diplomat negotiating treaties in the southeastern forests. Climate, geography, and available resources shaped every aspect of daily existence. During the medieval warm period, when Vikings briefly reached North America, indigenous peoples were building Cahokia, a city larger than London at the time. When Europe struggled through the Dark Ages, Native Americans were developing complex agricultural systems that would eventually feed the world. What unites all indigenous peoples is their deep integration with the natural world, sophisticated ecological knowledge, and complex social systems that maintained harmony between human needs and environmental sustainability. But the diversity of their daily experiences defies simple categorization. But how did this intricate balance between survival and sustainability actually play out in their everyday lives? The indigenous day began not with alarm clocks, but with the subtle signs of nature's awakening. Unlike our artificial schedules, native peoples followed rhythms established over thousands of years. The migration patterns of animals, the flowering cycles of plants, and the seasonal availability of resources. Morning typically began with tending the fire. Archaeological evidence from sites like Mesa Verde shows carefully maintained hearths that served as the heart of community life. These fires provided warmth, light, protection, and the means to cook food that would sustain entire families. But indigenous peoples weren't simply reactive to their environment. They were active managers of it. Evidence from across North America shows sophisticated landscape modification. Controlled burning created the vast grasslands that supported massive buffalo herds. Selective harvesting encouraged useful plant growth. Fish weirs and game drives demonstrated engineering skills that channeled natural processes for human benefit. The day's activities varied dramatically by season and location. Spring brought the return of salmon runs in the Pacific Northwest, requiring entire communities to coordinate fishing, processing, and preservation efforts. Summer meant tending the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, in careful agricultural systems that sustained millions of people across the continent. Rather than rigid schedules, indigenous life followed patterns of seasonal abundance and scarcity. Archaeological evidence from sites like Poverty Point in Louisiana, dating back 3,700 years, shows remarkable planning capabilities. Massive earthwork complexes aligned with astronomical events, demonstrating sophisticated understanding of seasonal cycles. Autumn was harvest time, but also preparation time. Communities gathered nuts, dried fish, processed meat into pemmican, and stored surplus foods in sophisticated underground caches. Winter wasn't dormancy, but a time for indoor crafts, storytelling, and the spiritual activities that maintained cultural continuity. Food acquisition dominated daily life, but not in the desperate struggle often imagined. Archaeological analysis of indigenous remains shows generally excellent nutrition, with diverse diets that included hundreds of plant species alongside carefully managed animal resources. But how did they manage to feed entire civilizations without the agricultural techniques we consider essential today? Indigenous peoples weren't primitive hunter-gatherers waiting for Europeans to introduce agriculture. They were the world's master plant breeders. By the time of contact, Native Americans had developed over 4,000 potato varieties, domesticated corn from a grass called teosinte, and created agricultural systems that fed populations larger than most European cities. The Three Sisters agriculture system represents one of humanity's most elegant farming innovations. Corn provided structure for climbing beans, which fixed nitrogen in the soil to feed heavy-feeding corn and squash. Squash leaves shaded the ground, conserving moisture and preventing weeds. This polyculture produced more food per acre than European grain monocultures. In the Southwest, ancestral Puebloans developed terracing and irrigation systems that allowed farming in desert conditions. Check dams captured seasonal rainfall, while carefully engineered canals distributed water across vast agricultural complexes. Some of these systems remained functional for over 1,000 years. Hunting wasn't random pursuit, but carefully orchestrated community effort. Plains tribes developed buffalo jumps, complex systems that channeled entire herds over cliffs, providing meat, hides, bones, and other materials for hundreds of people. Archaeological sites show these operations required detailed planning, cooperation between multiple bands, and sophisticated understanding of animal behavior. The legendary buffalo hunts on horseback represent only the final 300 years of indigenous history. For millennia before horses arrived, native peoples developed pedestrian hunting techniques that were equally effective. Communal rabbit drives could involve hundreds of participants and provide protein for entire communities. Fishing technologies varied by region, but demonstrated remarkable sophistication. Pacific Northwest peoples developed fish wheels, traps, and weirs that efficiently harvested salmon runs while ensuring sustainable populations for future generations. Great Lakes tribes created ice fishing techniques that provided food throughout harsh winters. Plant gathering required encyclopedic knowledge passed down through generations. A single Paiute woman might know the properties, processing techniques, and seasonal availability of over 200 plant species. This wasn't casual foraging, but systematic resource management that included transplanting useful species and maintaining wild gardens. Food storage and preservation technologies were crucial for survival. Plains tribes developed pemmican, a concentrated mixture of dried meat, fat, and berries that could last for years. Northeastern peoples created cache pits lined with bark and stone that preserved corn through harsh winters. Coastal peoples perfected smoking and drying techniques that transformed abundant seasonal catches into year-round protein sources. But sophisticated food systems were just one aspect of the remarkable technologies indigenous peoples developed to thrive in every North American environment. Indigenous peoples weren't living in a Stone Age. They were master technologists whose innovations often surpassed European equivalents. When Spanish conquistadors first encountered Aztec obsidian blades, they marveled at cutting edges sharper than their finest steel swords. Tool technologies varied dramatically by region and available materials. Arctic peoples created sophisticated composite tools using bone, antler, wood, and stone. A single Inuit harpoon might incorporate a dozen different materials, each chosen for specific properties and carefully joined with sinew, wood pegs, and ingenious mechanical connections. In the eastern woodlands, indigenous peoples developed copper working techniques thousands of years before European contact. The Great Lakes region produced copper tools, ornaments, and ceremonial objects that were traded across the continent. Archaeological evidence shows mining operations that extracted tons of high-grade copper using fire setting and stone hammers. Architecture represented some of humanity's most impressive achievements. Southwestern peoples built Pueblo Bonito in Chaco Canyon, a structure containing over 650 rooms, rising 4 stories high and incorporating sophisticated astronomical alignments. The engineering required to construct these massive buildings without draft animals or metal tools demonstrates remarkable technical skill. Northeastern longhouses could extend over 100 feet in length, housing multiple related families in carefully organized interior spaces. These structures used flexible wooden frameworks that could withstand severe weather while providing comfortable living conditions for dozens of people. Plains peoples developed the taipi, perhaps history's most efficient portable shelter, a structure that could house a family of 8, be assembled by 2 people in minutes, and withstand prairie winds that destroyed European tents. The geometric principles behind tipi construction influenced modern architectural design. Transportation technologies adapted to diverse environments. Northeastern peoples created birch bark canoes so light 2 people could carry them, yet strong enough to navigate dangerous rapids while loaded with trade goods. These designs were so superior that European explorers immediately adopted them. Plains peoples developed the travois, an ingenious device that allowed dogs, and later horses, to transport heavy loads across roadless terrain. Arctic peoples created kayaks and umiaks, perfectly adapted to sea mammal hunting in dangerous northern waters. Textile technologies produced some of the world's finest fabrics. Southwestern peoples created cotton textiles with thread counts rivaling modern fabrics. Pacific Northwest peoples wove cedar bark and mountain goat wool into waterproof clothing that kept wearers dry in the rainiest climate on Earth. Tool manufacturing wasn't occasional but constant. Stone tools required regular maintenance and replacement. A skilled knapper could produce functional tools in minutes, but specialized implements required days of careful work. The sophistication of indigenous tool technologies is evident in projectile points, so precisely made they're nearly impossible to replicate with modern techniques. But these impressive technologies were just the foundation for social systems that governed millions of people across the continent, without written laws or centralized governments. Indigenous societies developed governance systems that would influence the world's most important political documents. When European philosophers wrote about democracy and individual rights, they were often describing indigenous political concepts they had observed in North America. The basic social unit varied by culture, but kinship formed the foundation of indigenous society. Iroquois longhouses weren't just buildings. They represented complex family structures where related women, their husbands, and children lived together under the guidance of clan mothers who held real political power. These weren't simple tribal arrangements, but sophisticated governmental systems. The Haudenosaunee Iroquois Confederacy united 6 nations under a constitution that included concepts of representative democracy, separation of powers, and women's political rights, innovations that wouldn't appear in European political thought for centuries. Decision-making processes emphasized consensus rather than majority rule. Councils could deliberate for days to reach agreements that satisfied all participants. This wasn't inefficiency, but a recognition that successful communities required genuine buy-in from all members. Trade networks connected the entire continent in economic relationships that spanned thousands of miles. Pacific coast shells reached the Great Lakes. Great Lakes copper appeared in southeastern ceremonial centers. Obsidian from western volcanoes was crafted into tools in the eastern woodlands. These weren't random exchanges, but systematic economic relationships maintained through diplomatic protocols, ceremonial obligations, and kinship connections. Archaeological evidence shows trade routes that remained stable for centuries, indicating sophisticated commercial institutions. Conflict resolution mechanisms prevented the constant warfare often imagined in popular culture. Compensation systems allowed communities to address grievances without violence. Adoption practices integrated captives into communities rather than enslaving them. Diplomatic protocols governed interactions between groups with different languages and customs. Gender roles varied dramatically between cultures, but often provided more flexibility than European equivalents. Many societies recognized multiple gender categories and allowed individuals to assume roles based on personal inclination rather than birth assignment. Women often held significant political, economic, and spiritual authority. Social rank existed but wasn't rigidly hereditary. Leadership positions were often earned through demonstrated skill, wisdom, or spiritual power. Potlatch ceremonies in the Pacific Northwest allowed individuals to gain status through generous gift-giving rather than wealth accumulation. Child-rearing integrated young people into adult activities from an early age. Unlike modern age segregation, indigenous children learned essential skills by observing and participating in daily life. This created educational systems that produced adults with comprehensive knowledge of their culture's technologies, spiritual practices, and social obligations. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of indigenous daily life was how seamlessly spiritual practices, artistic expression, and cultural transmission were woven into every activity. Indigenous spiritual life wasn't separate from daily existence. It permeated every activity, from the morning's first prayers to evening Thanksgiving ceremonies. Unlike European concepts of religion as a weekly obligation, indigenous spirituality was a constant awareness of humanity's place within the natural world. Ceremonial cycles followed natural rhythms, marking seasonal transitions, agricultural stages, and life passages. Green corn ceremonies in the southeast celebrated successful harvests while renewing social relationships and cultural commitments. Sundance ceremonies on the plains brought together multiple bands for spiritual renewal and community bonding. Art wasn't decoration, but communication. A visual language that encoded cultural knowledge, spiritual concepts, and historical events. Southwestern pottery incorporated designs that mapped astronomical observations. Plains-hide paintings recorded historical events and spiritual visions. Northeastern wampum belts served as diplomatic documents and memory aids for oral treaties. Musical traditions served multiple functions beyond entertainment. Songs carried historical information, healing knowledge, and spiritual power. Flutes carved from eagle bones or cedar wood produced music that could induce trance states, communicate across vast distances, or accompany ceremonial dances. Archaeological evidence reveals musical sophistication dating back thousands of years. Bone flutes, clay whistles, and carved drums demonstrate that indigenous peoples developed complex musical systems with scales, rhythms, and ceremonial functions that rival any world tradition. Storytelling wasn't just entertainment, but the primary educational technology. Stories encoded survival information, moral principles, historical events, and spiritual teachings in memorable narratives that could be transmitted across generations without writing. These oral traditions maintained cultural continuity for thousands of years. Artistic expression extended to every manufactured object. Tools weren't merely functional, they incorporated decorative elements that identified their makers, indicated their ceremonial significance, or enhanced their spiritual power. A simple pottery vessel might encode astronomical observations, clan affiliations, and artistic traditions spanning centuries. Medicine combined practical plant knowledge with ceremonial healing practices. Indigenous pharmacology identified hundreds of medicinal plants, many of which remain important in modern medicine. Spiritual healing addressed social and psychological causes of illness that purely physical treatments couldn't resolve. Evidence for sophisticated medical knowledge appears throughout the archaeological record. Successful surgical procedures, effective treatments for common ailments, and herbal medicines that Europeans quickly adopted all demonstrate indigenous medical sophistication that often surpassed European equivalents. Sacred sites anchored communities to specific landscapes through spiritual and historical connections. These weren't random locations, but carefully chosen places where natural features, astronomical alignments, and cultural meanings intersected. Many sites maintained spiritual significance for thousands of years. But how did these rich cultural traditions actually manage to sustain themselves while maintaining perfect balance with a natural world that supported them? Indigenous peoples weren't primitive peoples living in harmony with nature. They were sophisticated environmental managers who actively shaped entire ecosystems to enhance both human welfare and ecological health. The pristine wilderness that Europeans claimed to discover was actually a carefully managed landscape, maintained through thousands of years of indigenous land stewardship. Controlled burning was perhaps the most important land management tool. Prairie fires prevented forest encroachment, encouraged grass growth that supported large herbivore populations, and reduced catastrophic wildfire risk. Archaeological evidence shows indigenous fire management created the vast grasslands that supported an estimated 60 million buffalo. In California, indigenous burning practices maintained oak woodlands that produced massive acorn harvests while preventing the catastrophic fires that now plague the region. When indigenous burning stopped after European contact, fire suppression policies created dense forests that burn with unprecedented intensity. Selective harvesting practices ensured sustainable resource use across generations. Pacific Northwest peoples developed salmon fishing protocols that harvested abundant runs while ensuring adequate spawning populations. These systems sustained both human populations and fish runs for thousands of years. Agricultural practices enhanced rather than depleted soil fertility. Three Sisters agriculture fixed nitrogen, prevented erosion, and maintained soil health without external inputs. Terracing systems in the Southwest captured and conserved water while preventing soil loss in arid environments. Indigenous hunting practices included sophisticated conservation measures. Seasonal restrictions protected animals during vulnerable periods. Rotational hunting allowed game populations to recover. Taboos against overharvesting were enforced through spiritual and social sanctions. Plant management extended far beyond agriculture. Indigenous peoples transplanted useful species, maintained wild gardens, and practiced selective harvesting that encouraged desired varieties. Many landscapes that appear natural actually reflect thousands of years of indigenous plant management. Archaeological evidence reveals the remarkable sustainability of indigenous resource management. Sites occupied continuously for thousands of years show no evidence of resource depletion or environmental degradation. This contrasts sharply with many archaeological sites from agricultural civilizations that show clear signs of environmental collapse. Water management systems demonstrated sophisticated understanding of hydrological cycles. Check dams, irrigation canals, and watershed protection practices maintained water quality and availability even during drought periods. Many indigenous water management systems remained functional for centuries without maintenance. Wildlife management practices maintained biodiversity while providing human resources. Indigenous peoples understood ecological relationships that European colonists ignored, leading to ecosystem collapses when traditional management practices ended. Modern conservation biology increasingly recognizes indigenous knowledge as essential for addressing current environmental challenges. Traditional ecological knowledge developed over thousands of years often provides insights that scientific research has only recently discovered. This sophisticated environmental management was the foundation for what may have been humanity's most successful and sustainable way of life. But what can we learn from these achievements as we face our own environmental crisis? The indigenous lifestyle represents the longest and most successful human adaptation in North American history, sustaining diverse civilizations through dramatic climate changes and enabling sustainable population growth across an entire continent. What can we learn from this remarkable achievement? First, indigenous peoples were masterful environmental scientists. Rather than passive recipients of nature's bounty, they actively managed entire ecosystems through controlled burning, selective harvesting, and sophisticated agricultural systems. Archaeological evidence from across North America shows landscape modification that enhanced both human welfare and ecological health. Second, indigenous societies demanded extraordinary knowledge integration. Each individual needed working understanding of hundreds of species, complex ecological relationships, seasonal cycles, social protocols, spiritual practices, and technical skills. This generalist approach contrasts sharply with our modern specialization and suggests alternative models for education and human development. Third, their technologies represented elegant solutions to environmental challenges. While different from modern equivalents, indigenous innovations often proved superior for their specific contexts. Many principles behind indigenous technologies continue to influence modern engineering, architecture, and sustainable design. Fourth, indigenous governance systems pioneered political concepts that would eventually transform world civilization. Democratic principles, individual rights, women's political participation, and environmental stewardship were indigenous innovations that European colonists observed and adapted. Perhaps most significantly, indigenous cultures achieved something modern civilization still struggles to accomplish: genuine sustainability. For thousands of years, these societies maintained high quality of life while enhancing rather than degrading their environments. The indigenous period wasn't a primitive prelude to real civilization, but a highly successful adaptation that supported millions of people across diverse environments without causing environmental collapse. Their achievements become more impressive when we consider they were accomplished without written language, metal tools, or domestic animals. So what did a Native American do all day? They engaged in sophisticated environmental management that sustained entire ecosystems. They practiced agricultural techniques that enhanced soil fertility. They manufactured technologies perfectly adapted to their environments. They maintained social systems that governed millions of people without centralized authority. They created art, music, and literature that encoded thousands of years of accumulated wisdom. They developed healing practices that addressed both physical and spiritual wellness. They maintained trade networks spanning continents. They educated children through integrated learning that prepared them for adult responsibilities. Their solutions, from sustainable agriculture to democratic governance, laid foundations for many modern achievements while avoiding the environmental destruction that threatens our own civilization. The next time you imagine a Native American, consider not a stoic warrior in a Hollywood film, but a skilled environmental scientist, a sophisticated agriculturalist, an innovative engineer, a wise diplomat, and a spiritual teacher, all embodied in remarkably adaptable humans who created the world's most successful sustainable civilizations. Their legacy reminds us that human ingenuity, properly applied, can enhance rather than destroy the natural world that sustains us all. If these agricultural innovations are already blowing your mind, just wait until you see the incredible technologies they developed next. But before we dive into their engineering marvels, hit that like button if you're learning something new about indigenous peoples today. And drop a comment below. What surprised you most so far? Was it the 4,000 potato varieties, the Three Sisters farming system, or those 1,000-year-old irrigation networks? I read every single comment because your insights help me create better content. And if you want to keep uncovering the hidden truths about ancient civilizations, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because next week we're exploring how these same peoples built cities that rivaled European capitals. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.